The way you drive it, you're the greatest putter I've ever seen. But Jack is the greatest, still can putt the same way. The method that he has is flawless. Nobody's ever copied it. But Jack had the fastest left shoulder I've ever seen. What do you have when you have a fast left shoulder? Jack was a fader. Everybody thinks he drew the ball. He never did that. He faded everything.
And at that time there, Matt, when I walked off the green, Jack came over to me and he put his arm around my neck like this, tugged like this, and he looked at me. He said, "Tom, I gave you my best shot, but it wasn't good enough." And he smiled and he said, "Congratulations, I'm really happy for you." In my career, that was probably the biggest change in my career right now. When Jack said he gave me his best shot and it wasn't good enough, I said, now maybe I've arrived and I can beat and play with the big boys.
Golf legends will tell you that facing Jack Nicklaus was absolutely terrifying, and that he was built different from every other player who ever picked up a club. But here is the strange part. Nicklaus never trash-talked. He never threw clubs. He never bullied anyone. He did not try to get in your head. So why did the greatest players in history describe him as the most frightening opponent they ever faced? The answer lies in something far more unsettling than anger. It was the quiet certainty that no matter how well you played, he would still be there, calm and unbothered, hunting you down. Imagine playing the best golf of your life. Every drive splits the fairway, every approach sticks close. You are in the zone. Then you look at the leaderboard. Jack Nicklaus, right behind you, not panicking, just there, waiting for you to blink. You could not shake him. You could only hope to outplay him for 72 straight holes. Almost nobody could. In 1986, at 46, the world wrote him off as washed up. He had not won a major in 6 years. The media dismissed him. When asked if he could still compete, Nicklaus responded simply, "I know I can." Then he proved it, shooting a back 930 at Augusta, winning the Masters by 1 stroke. That mental fortress, that unshakable belief in himself, even when the entire world doubted, was the foundation of the terror. If you are enjoying this story, use the hype feature and give hype to this video right now. It helps us bring you more content like this. Now let's hear from 7 legends about facing the Golden Bear. Number 7. Nick Faldo grew up idolizing Jack Nicklaus. To Faldo, Nicklaus was the gold standard, the measuring stick by which every golfer judged themselves. As a boy in England, Faldo watched Nicklaus on television, studying his swing, course management, and mental approach. Nicklaus represented everything Faldo wanted to become: the precision, the composure under pressure, the ability to deliver clutch shots when everything was on the line. So when Faldo made the 1977 Ryder Cup team in his first professional year, just 6 years after seriously picking up a club, it felt like a dream. But dreams become nightmares when you must compete against your idol. The Ryder Cup is team golf, but also intensely personal. Match play golf strips away all cushions and safety nets. There is no hiding behind a good back nine to make up for mistakes. You face your opponent directly, hole after hole, shot for shot. Faldo paired with Peter Oosterhuis against Nicklaus and Ray Floyd in a 4-ball match. For most young players in their first professional year, this would have been completely paralyzing. The logical response would be feeling overwhelmed, playing conservatively, trying not to embarrass yourself. But Faldo did something almost nobody else managed to do in that era. He beat him. Faldo and Oosterhuis won the match 3-1. Not close, not a lucky final hole break. A decisive, dominant victory over the greatest player in the world. For Faldo, it was validation on the highest possible stage. Years later, Faldo would joke about it, saying, "Just 6 years from picking up a golf club, I beat the great Jack Nicklaus in the Ryder Cup, and I remind Jack of this every time I see him too." That line always gets laughs, but masks a deeper truth. Beating Nicklaus, even once, even in a team format, was such a monumental achievement that it became a defining moment of his entire career. It proved he belonged on the same course, breathing the same competitive air as the greatest player who ever lived. Faldo finished that 1977 Ryder Cup with a perfect individual record: 3 wins, 0 losses, 0 halves. Flawless. But the victory over Nicklaus mattered most to him personally. Ultimate proof of tour credentials. The moment when a young Englishman announced his arrival by toppling the man everyone feared. Yet even in defeat, Nicklaus cast a long shadow. That Faldo still brings it up decades later shows just how incredibly rare such results were. Most players went their entire careers without beating him in a meaningful match. Faldo got one victory to hang his hat on, and it fueled his career, setting the stage for his own dominant run when he would win 6 major championships and establish himself as one of the greatest players of his generation. But even with all that success, even with his own legacy secured, Nicklaus remained the benchmark in Faldo's mind. The terror was not just the possibility of losing. It was knowing that even winning once meant nothing permanent, because Nicklaus would be back tomorrow, and he would remember, and he would hunt you down with that calm precision that made him terrifying. Number 6. Billy Casper won 51 PGA Tour events over the course of his competitive career. 3 major championships, including 2 US Opens and 1 Masters. He captured 5 Vardon trophies for having the lowest scoring average on tour, more than Palmer or Player combined. He set Ryder Cup points records that stood for decades. By every measurable standard, every statistical metric that actually matters in professional golf, Casper was one of the absolute greatest golfers of his generation. He belongs in any serious conversation about elite players from the 1960s. Yet most casual fans today have never even heard his name. Walk up to someone and ask them to name the legends of that era, and they will rattle off the big 3 without hesitation. Nicklaus, Palmer, Player. Those 3 names roll off the tongue automatically. And then the conversation will move on as if those were the only 3 players who mattered, as if nobody else won tournaments or competed at the highest level during that golden age of golf. That is the uniquely cruel terror Jack Nicklaus inflicted on Billy Casper. Not the terror of losing golf tournaments on the scorecard, because Casper actually beat Nicklaus head-to-head in major championships multiple times. In 1966, Billy Casper defeated both Nicklaus and Palmer to win the US Open at Olympic Club in San Francisco. And it was not just any victory. It was one of the most dramatic, improbable comebacks in the entire history of professional golf. Arnold Palmer had a 7-shot lead with just 9 holes remaining to play. The tournament was over in everyone's mind. Palmer was already thinking ahead to the trophy presentation and what he would say in his victory speech. The media members in the press tent were preparing stories about Palmer's dominant performance. And then Billy Casper went to work with a performance that should be legendary. Hole after hole, Casper methodically chipped away at the lead, whilst Palmer started to falter under the pressure and make uncharacteristic mistakes. By the time both players reached the 18th green, the absolutely impossible had happened. The 7-shot lead had completely evaporated. They finished tied and went to an 18-hole playoff the next day. And in that playoff, Casper absolutely dominated from start to finish, shooting 69 to Palmer's 73, claiming the championship in convincing fashion with no drama on the final holes. It was a masterclass in patience and pressure golf, and staying mentally strong when everyone else was panicking, in believing you could win when all logic and probability said you were beaten. But here is where the problem reveals itself. Here is where the terror shows its most insidious form. History does not remember that tournament as Billy Casper's triumph. If you read contemporary articles about the 1966 US Open, if you watch documentaries about that era of golf, the storyline that dominates every single telling is about Arnold Palmer blowing a 7-shot lead. The narrative that lives on in highlight reels and golf retrospectives is exclusively about the King's collapse, Palmer's mistakes, Palmer's missed putts, Palmer's visible disappointment and frustration walking off greens. Billy Casper, the man who actually won the tournament, the man who made all those crucial birdies and holed all those clutch putts under maximum pressure, gets mentioned almost as an afterthought in the story, a footnote to Palmer's failure rather than the protagonist of his own victory. That storyline, the story of the King's dramatic fall from grace, completely swallowed Casper's incredible performance whole and never spit it back out. Billy Casper himself later described what it was like competing in that particular era, where he had to deliver absolute career best performances week after week just to stay marginally relevant in the public conversation, whilst Jack Nicklaus was busy fundamentally redefining what greatness even meant in professional golf. The terror Casper experienced was not physical. It was not about losing tournaments or failing to execute shots under pressure or choking in big moments. It was existential. It was what the research calls narrative invisibility, the soul-crushing feeling of being systematically erased from history whilst you were still actively writing it with your clubs. The golf world was so completely and utterly captivated by the Big Three, so obsessed with the personal rivalry between Nicklaus and Palmer, so fascinated by Gary Player's global reach and fitness dedication, that even elite champions with 51 career victories like Billy Casper were ruthlessly pushed to the margins of the story everyone wanted to tell. Casper once said that his game was in really good shape in 1966, and he felt ready to play his best golf. He went out and won a major championship, beating the 2 biggest names in golf in the process, delivering under maximum pressure when it mattered most. And yet, when you read about that US Open now, when you watch old footage or listen to modern retrospectives, the focus is relentlessly and exclusively on Palmer's collapse, not on Casper's brilliant closing stretch or his absolutely dominant playoff performance. It is as if Casper was not even present at the tournament, as if the event simply happened to Palmer, and Casper just passively benefited from being in the right place at the right time, a fortunate recipient of Palmer's misfortune rather than an active champion who earned his victory through skill and mental toughness. That kind of erasure, that complete invisibility despite winning, is a profoundly different kind of defeat than anything that happens on a scorecard. Jack Nicklaus himself, in interviews years later, admitted that seeing Billy Casper's name appear on a leaderboard during a tournament always immediately got his attention and made him sharpen his focus. That is incredibly high praise from a man who rarely rarely acknowledged competitive threats before they had thoroughly proven themselves, who rarely gave other competitors advance credit or recognition. Nicklaus knew exactly how good Casper was at golf. He genuinely respected Casper's game, his exceptional consistency, his brilliant putting touch, his proven ability to close out tournaments when he had the lead on Sunday. But personal respect from your peers does not automatically translate into public visibility or historical recognition. The blinding, overwhelming light of the Nicklaus-Palmer rivalry was so intense, so all-consuming for the media and the public, that even a 51-time winner like Billy Casper could not escape the shadows it cast across the entire sport. And that represents a different kind of absolutely terrifying than losing on the golf course. It is not the competitive defeat that haunts you for the rest of your life. It is winning at the highest level and still being completely forgotten by history. It is knowing deep in your soul that you did absolutely everything right, that you competed at the highest level the sport has ever seen, that you claimed victories and titles and trophies and records, and yet the world simply moved on without really noticing or caring what you accomplished. Casper's career stands as a stark reminder that in the Nicklaus era, pure greatness alone was never enough to secure your rightful place in history. You had to be great and loud, great and charismatic, great and naturally part of the story everyone wanted to tell around the dinner table. Billy Casper was undeniably, statistically great on the golf course week after week, but he was fundamentally quiet and reserved off it. He did not court the media, he did not create drama or controversy, he just showed up and played exceptional golf. And in a world where Jack Nicklaus was actively rewriting the entire definition of dominance, where every single tournament became a referendum on whether Nicklaus would win or who might possibly stop him this week, quiet greatness got systematically airbrushed out of the narrative. The terror Billy Casper experienced was not competitive defeat that shows up on any scorecard. It was being methodically erased from history whilst you were still actively writing it with your golf clubs, winning major championships and setting scoring records, but somehow remaining completely invisible in the story everyone was telling. Number 5. Johnny Miller had a gift for distilling truth into simple sentences. His most famous observation about Nicklaus became the defining summary of that dominance. Miller said, "When Nicklaus plays well, he wins. When he plays badly, he finishes second. When he plays terribly, he finishes third." First hearing that, people laugh. Sounds like a joke, but it was not. It was statistical fact from watching Nicklaus year after year. The terror Miller described was the terror of the floor, the baseline below which Nicklaus refused to fall. In most sports, a bad day means you lose badly. A terrible day means embarrassment. But in the Nicklaus era, a bad day for Jack meant second place in a major. A terrible day meant third. That baseline created a psychological trap for everyone else. You could play the round of your life, execute every shot perfectly, make every putt, and still only finish ahead of Nicklaus if he happened to have an off week. And even then, off for Nicklaus meant third place, which for most players would be a career highlight. Miller lived this reality firsthand during the 1970s, his prime years. He won the 1973 U.S. Open, shooting a final round 63, one of the greatest closing rounds in major history, a performance for the ages, but even then, Miller knew he had been fortunate. Nicklaus had not been at his absolute best. If Nicklaus had been firing on all cylinders, Miller's 63 might have only been good enough for second. That knowledge created constant pressure that wore players down mentally. The numbers back up Miller's axiom in terrifying detail. Between 1962 and 1980, Nicklaus finished top 3 in 41 of the majors contested, a 54% success rate. More than half the time, Nicklaus finished top 3. For context, Tiger Woods finished top 3 in 26 majors over his entire career. Nicklaus did it 46 times total. The gap between Nicklaus and everyone else is not just in victories, it is in relentless, suffocating consistency. Miller noted that even on Nicklaus's worst days, the rest of the field felt they were competing for runner-up. That is the essence of terror. Not that Nicklaus always won, that he never lost badly, never collapsed, never disappeared. If you wanted to beat Jack Nicklaus in a major, you had to play better than him for 72 holes, not just outplay him Sunday or get hot for one round. You had to sustain excellence across 4 days, in all conditions, under maximum pressure, and almost nobody could do that. The floor was too high, margin for error too thin, one bad round, one shaky 9 holes, one stretch where you lost focus, and Nicklaus would pass you and never look back. Johnny Miller gave us the words to describe this, but every player who competed against him felt it in their bones. The terror of knowing your absolute best might only be good enough for second. Number 4. Lee Trevino talked nonstop. On the course, off the course, practice rounds, majors, it did not matter. Trevino had a joke for every occasion. For years, people assumed that was just his personality, but the truth was more calculated. calculated. Trevino's constant talking was his survival mechanism against competing with Nicklaus. Trevino recognized early that Nicklaus's concentration was an iron force, so intense it could stifle an opponent's rhythm and drain confidence. So Trevino built a defense. If he could not break Nicklaus's focus, he could at least protect his own by filling silence with noise. The most famous example came at the 1971 U.S. Open playoff at Marion. As both stood on the first tee, Trevino reached into his bag and pulled out a rubber snake, then tossed it at Nicklaus. The gallery erupted in laughter. Many assumed Trevino was trying to rattle Nicklaus, but both later clarified the truth. Trevino was not trying to unnerve Nicklaus. He was trying to loosen himself up. Trevino admitted he needed all the help he could get to beat the man he considered the greatest. That humility buried beneath the jokes reveals the real terror. Even a player as talented as Trevino, who would win 6 majors, felt he needed psychological tricks just to stay level. Trevino famously joked that when Nicklaus was in the field, he was only playing for second place, a self-deprecating line that got big laughs, but also rooted in statistical reality. And here is where it gets interesting. Trevino beat Nicklaus head-to-head in 4 majors. In 1968 at Oak Hill, Trevino first, Nicklaus second. In 1971 at Marion, same result. In 1972 at Muirfield, Trevino again edged Nicklaus. In 1974 at Tanglewood, same. 4 of Trevino's 6 major victories came with Nicklaus as runner-up. That makes Trevino one of the few who could claim to have a Nicklaus's number. Yet even with that record, Trevino maintained that you gotta be lucky to beat Jack Nicklaus because he's the greatest golfer to ever hold a club. Trevino shared that Nicklaus once told him he was a lot better than I thought I was. That compliment from the man Trevino spent years trying to match meant everything. Validation from the one person whose opinion mattered most. But it also underscored the psychological dynamic. Even in victory, Trevino was seeking approval from Nicklaus, measuring himself against the standard Nicklaus set. The terror was not in losses. It was knowing that even when you won, you had only just survived. And Nicklaus would be back tomorrow, calm and unbothered, ready to hunt again. Number 3. The 1977 Open Championship at Turnberry is remembered as the duel in the sun, one of the greatest head-to-head battles in golf history. For the final 2 rounds, Nicklaus and Tom Watson were paired together, turning a major into a private match play war. The rest of the field became irrelevant. The tournament stopped being about lowest score and became a pure test of wills between the legend and the rising star. And the scores they posted were almost inhuman. Both shot 65 in the 3rd round. Both shot 65 in the final round. In conditions that destroyed everyone else, Nicklaus and Watson played like they were on a different planet. When it was over, Watson won at 268, 12 under par. Nicklaus finished 1 shot back at 269, and 3rd place, Hubert Green, finished at 279, 10 full strokes behind Nicklaus. That 10-stroke gap between 2nd and 3rd is the clearest illustration of the Nicklaus effect. He did not just compete, he dragged his primary rival into a stratosphere of performance no one else could touch. Watson was forced to play the best golf of his life just to survive, and even then, it came down to the final hole. At the 18th, Nicklaus drove into the gorse, thick rough that should have meant bogey and the end of his chances. Tournament should have been over, but Nicklaus did what he always did. He saved a birdie from the gorse on the 72nd hole of a major. That miraculous recovery forced Watson to hole a 3-foot putt just to win. One slip, one moment of doubt, and Watson would have lost despite playing 2 of the best rounds ever seen. Watson later said that Jack Nicklaus was the man you had to beat to be the best. Not enough to play well, not enough to shoot low scores. You had to beat Nicklaus specifically because he was the measuring stick, the standard, the benchmark. Watson also noted that no one ever competed harder than Nicklaus. No one ever wanted to win more than Nicklaus. That relentless competitiveness, that refusal to concede even when the odds were mathematically thin, was the source of terror. Even when Nicklaus was in trouble, even when the tournament seemed decided, he found a way to claw back, to make one more birdie, to force you to execute under maximum pressure. And if you faltered for even a second, he would take everything. Watson did not falter. He made the putt. He won the duel in the sun. But the cost was exhaustion. Watson walked off the course completely drained from the mental effort of staying focused for 36 holes whilst playing against a man who refused to go away. And the truly terrifying part was knowing Nicklaus would be back next week and at the next major. He would be there demanding that same level of perfection every time. One moment of weakness and he would run you down without mercy. Number 2. The 1962 U.S. Open at Oakmont was the moment the golf world realized a fundamental shift had occurred. Arnold Palmer was the undisputed king, beloved by millions, a charismatic force who had turned golf into a television spectacle. Palmer's aggressive style, his emotional approach, his habit of hitching his pants and going for broke on risky shots had had captured sports fans who had never cared about golf before. He made it exciting. He made it dramatic. And in 1962, he was at the peak of his powers. Oakmont was essentially Palmer's backyard, located miles from his hometown of Latrobe, Pennsylvania. The gallery was packed with Palmer supporters. They called themselves Arnie's Army, and they were fiercely loyal. Every Palmer birdie was greeted with roars. Every Palmer putt was met with held breath and erupting cheers, and every mistake by Palmer's competitors was met with jeers. The primary target was a 22-year-old rookie named Jack Nicklaus, the chubby kid from Ohio who dared to challenge their king on his home turf. The crowd did not just root against Nicklaus. They actively tried to break him. They shouted Fat Jack. They hurled insults. They wanted him to fail, to collapse, to let Palmer claim the victory everyone assumed was his. But Nicklaus did not flinch. He did not react. He did not let the hostile crowd penetrate his concentration even slightly. Nicklaus later recalled he had blinders on during that week, focusing entirely on the mechanics of his swing and the demands of the course. The crowd noise was irrelevant. The pressure was irrelevant. All that mattered was execution, one shot at a time. The tournament came down to an 18-hole playoff. Palmer versus Nicklaus, King versus Challenger, in front of a gallery desperate to see Palmer win. And the statistical breakdown reveals exactly why Nicklaus was about to become the most terrifying player in golf history. Over 90 total holes, including the playoff. Nicklaus had 1 3-putt. Palmer had 10. That precision on the greens, that clinical control under pressure, was the fundamental difference. In the playoff, Nicklaus shot 71. Palmer shot 74. Nicklaus won by 3 strokes, and everything changed. The balance of power shifted forever. Palmer himself acknowledged the shift immediately. After the playoff, Palmer made a statement to the press that has become famous. He said, "Now that the big guy is out of the cage, everybody better run for cover." An admission, a public recognition that something fundamental had changed. Palmer also praised Nicklaus's ability to hit long irons, specifically the 1-iron and 2-iron, higher and with more control than anyone else in history. That physical advantage, combined with the mental indestructibility Nicklaus had displayed by staying calm in a hostile environment, created a player who seemed unbeatable. But for Palmer personally, the loss was more than a professional defeat. It was a psychological wound that never fully healed. Palmer later confessed that the realization he should have made a 4 instead of a 6 at a decisive moment lived with me all my life, and still does. Decades later, Palmer was still haunted by that one hole, that one mistake. That internal haunting speaks to the specific type of terror Nicklaus inflicted, the terror of self-doubt. By consistently performing at a level that forced rivals to execute career-best shots just to remain competitive, Nicklaus created a state of high-stress performance that often led to mistakes. And those mistakes lived with his opponents forever. Palmer called Nicklaus a great player with a knack for playing golf very, very well. Simple praise, almost understated. But coming from Arnold Palmer, the man whose throne Nicklaus had just claimed, in front of Palmer's own fans on Palmer's home course, those words carried enormous weight. Palmer knew what the rest of the golf world was about to learn. The era of the king was over. The era of the golden bear had begun, and the terror was only getting started. Palmer's famous quote actually was longer, saying just the fact that he was so good. He was a great player, and he had a knack for playing the game of golf and played it very, very well. High praise from a dethroned king. Number 1. In 1986, Jack Nicklaus was 46 years old, an age when most golfers have retired. He had not won a major in 6 years. The media wrote him off as washed up, a relic who should gracefully step aside for younger stars. His peers shared that assessment. The narrative was not about competition. It was about legacy and retirement. But Gary Player, one of the few men to win a career Grand Slam and one of Nicklaus's fiercest rivals, saw something different. Player believed that Nicklaus possessed the greatest mind in the history of golf, a mental capacity that transcended physical ability. And in April 1986, that mind proved Player right in the most dramatic fashion. When people doubted Nicklaus, when the world told him his time was over, Nicklaus had a simple internal response he shared with Player. "I know I can." Those 4 words were not hope or wishful thinking. They were fact, rooted in decades of high-stakes execution and unshakable belief. Player witnessed this mindset and found it both terrifying and awe-inspiring. At the 1986 Masters, Nicklaus was not supposed to contend. He was not even supposed to be a factor. But in the final round on Sunday, something extraordinary happened. Nicklaus played a front 9 that was respectable but not exceptional, shooting 35, 1 under. Then on the back 9 at Augusta, with the golf world watching, Nicklaus turned back the clock. He posted a back 930, 6 under par on the most pressure-packed 9 holes in golf. A charge that left younger stars like Greg Norman, Seve Ballesteros, and Tom Kite scrambling to keep up. When the final round was over, Nicklaus had shot 65 and won the Masters by 1 stroke. At 46, in an era when golfers were supposed to decline rapidly after 40, Nicklaus had claimed his 6th green jacket, his 18th major, ultimate proof that the mind can overcome the body. Player later said that if circumstances had been different throughout Nicklaus's career, he could have won 20 or more majors instead of 18. That assertion reflects players' belief that Nicklaus's mental capacity was the true differentiator between a great player and a legendary one. The 1986 Masters was ultimate validation. It showed that the terror of Nicklaus was never just about physical skill or driving distance or putting touch. It was about the mind, the refusal to accept limitations, the ability to shut out doubt and criticism, and execute under the highest pressure. Players saw that mind up close for decades, competing against it, respecting it, fearing it, and in 1986, when the world had moved on, that mind reminded everyone why Jack Nicklaus was, and always would be, the standard. So what was the terror of Jack Nicklaus really about? When you step back and look at all these stories together, when you listen carefully to what all these legends are actually saying about competing against him for decades, a remarkably clear and consistent picture emerges. The terror was absolutely not cruelty or meanness. Nicklaus never taunted his opponents on the course, never celebrated publicly when they missed critical putts or hit bad shots in pressure moments, never played psychological mind games or tried to intimidate anyone with words or threatening gestures off the golf course. If anything, Nicklaus was unfailingly polite, respectful, and gracious to his competitors in every interaction. The terror was purely, exclusively performance-based, built on what the research documents call the strategic architecture of fear. That architecture rested firmly on 3 absolutely unshakable foundations that defined his entire career. First, concentration. Arnold Palmer once defined concentration in the simplest possible terms as focusing totally and completely on the business at hand, blocking out absolutely everything else that does not directly contribute to executing the specific shot in front of you. Jack Nicklaus embodied that definition more completely and consistently than any other player in the entire history of professional golf. Whether he was facing a viciously hostile crowd of 30,000 rabid Palmer fans at Oakmont Country Club who were actively trying to break his focus, or dealing with the relentlessly mounting pressure of the duel in the sun at Turnberry, where one mistake would cost him the championship, Nicklaus maintained an absolutely iron focus that created an impenetrable psychological barrier that very few opponents could match or penetrate. This legendary concentration was what Lee Trevino desperately tried to break with constant humor and rubber snake pranks. It was what Tom Watson tried to match through absolutely sheer force of will and determination, and it was what ultimately broke down and defeated most of Nicklaus's opponents over the long competitive arc of time. Second, consistency. Johnny Miller's famous axiom about Nicklaus was absolutely not a joke or comedic exaggeration designed to get laughs. It was a brutally accurate reflection of cold statistical data accumulated over decades of major championship golf. Nicklaus's terrible days, his absolute worst performances in major championships when nothing was working right, resulted in third-place finishes that would be career highlights for most players. His baseline level of performance, his floor, was demonstrably higher than most other players' absolute peaks and career best rounds, and that created an absolutely suffocating sense of inevitability for everyone competing against him week after week. You had to play virtually perfect golf for 4 complete days, 72 holes without a significant mistake, just to have any realistic chance of beating him. One bad round, one shaky 9-hole stretch, one brief period where you lost focus or confidence, and you were completely done. Nicklaus would methodically pass you on the leaderboard and never ever look back. Third, inevitability. There was no secret trick to beating Jack Nicklaus. No hidden strategy or magical tactical approach that would give you some kind of advantage or edge. No psychological weakness you could exploit. You simply had to go out and play demonstrably better golf than him over 72 complete holes of a major championship. And for an entire quarter century, spanning from 1962, when he turned professional, all the way to 1986, when he won that final Masters, almost nobody in the world could do that with any kind of consistency. The terror was knowing with absolute certainty that Nicklaus would always, without exception, be there on Sunday afternoon in the final round, calm and completely unbothered by pressure, patiently waiting for you to inevitably make that one crucial mistake under pressure. And when you finally did make that mistake, because all human beings eventually do, when the pressure becomes unbearable, he would take absolutely everything from you without the slightest hesitation or mercy. But here's the truly remarkable and often overlooked part of the entire Jack Nicklaus story that deserves much more attention. The terror was simultaneously also profound inspiration for everyone who competed against him. Nicklaus absolutely did not drag professional professional golf down to some ugly, defensive, boring style of play that killed excitement. He lifted the entire sport up to heights it had never previously reached in its long history. He forced his rivals and competitors to play at performance levels they genuinely did not know they were actually capable of reaching. Tom Watson's legendary performance in the duel in the sun at Turnberry, shooting those back-to-back rounds of 65 in brutal conditions, happened specifically because Nicklaus was right there beside him, pushing him to that superhuman level. Lee Trevino's 6 major championship victories, several of which were won in direct head-to-head competition against Nicklaus, with Nicklaus finishing as runner-up, meant infinitely more and carried far greater weight because of exactly who he was beating to claim those titles. Even Gary Player's incredible career Grand Slam achievement and his remarkable longevity competing at the highest level into his 40s were significantly elevated because they all happened directly in the shadow of Nicklaus, measured constantly against the impossible standard Nicklaus had established. Nicklaus did not just win golf tournaments and collect trophies, he fundamentally restructured the entire psychological expectations of what a professional golfer could possibly achieve at the highest level. He moved the sport decisively from the era of the charismatic hero, perfectly exemplified by Arnold Palmer's highly emotional and aggressive approach to every shot, to the era of the clinical professional where mental discipline and absolutely consistent execution mattered far more than natural flair or crowd-pleasing personality. He showed an entire generation of professional golfers that true greatness was not remotely about how you looked on camera or how enthusiastically the crowd responded to your style. It was exclusively about execution, meticulous preparation, unshakable mental toughness, and cultivating an absolutely unbreakable mind that categorically refused to accept defeat under any circumstances, and that demanding standard remains the ultimate benchmark in professional golf even today, decades after his final victory. When people debate who the greatest golfer of all time is today, regardless of generation or era, the conversation always, without exception, starts with Jack Nicklaus and his legendary career. 18 major championships, 19 runner-up finishes, 9 third-place finishes, 73 top 10 finishes in majors. The numbers are almost incomprehensible when you see them all together, but the real legacy is not captured in numbers alone. It is captured in the universal conclusion reached by every single player who competed against him. Palmer to Watson, to Trevino, to Faldo, they all walked away with the same profound understanding. Jack Nicklaus was the man you had to beat to be considered the best, and beating him required you to become the absolute best version of yourself, to access levels of performance you did not know you were capable of reaching. That is not terror in any negative sense. That is pure greatness. That is what it means to set a standard so impossibly high that everyone else has to fundamentally elevate their entire game just to compete. That is the lasting legacy of the Golden Bear. If you truly enjoyed this comprehensive deep dive into one of the greatest and most terrifyingly dominant competitive athletes of all time, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting us know which sports legend you want us to cover next. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.